I never thought I would live to see the day when my own children would look me in the eyes and refuse to save me. I remember the hospital lights, sterile and white, burning above me like judgmental angels. The air smelled of antiseptic, too clean, almost cruel. I could feel the dull ache in my chest growing sharper with every shallow breath, like a hand squeezing the last bit of life out of me. The doctor stood beside my bed with a clipboard in his hand, his face solemn, his tone urgent. "We need immediate surgery. Without it, she may not survive the night. We need someone to sign the consent form." He looked at my 2 children, Anna and David, who stood at the foot of the bed. Their eyes didn't meet mine, not even once. I tried to lift my hand, weak and trembling, to reach for them, but the IV line and the weight of my body held me down. My voice was barely a whisper, but I managed to say, "Please just sign. Please." I thought I was begging strangers, but they were my flesh and blood, the very reason I had worked 2 jobs for most of my life, the reason I sacrificed my youth and my health. And yet in that moment they were silent. The silence was the kind that cuts deeper than any words. I could see Anna's jaw tighten as she glanced at David. David crossed his arms over his chest, his expression cold, calculating like a man about to sign away a bad investment. Finally, Anna spoke, her voice sharp and low. "Doctor, how much will this surgery cost?" The doctor hesitated, perhaps sensing the weight of the question. "It depends on complications, but at least $50,000. $50,000. That was the price tag they put on my life. I watched as David shook his head, slowly, lips curling into a grim line. "She's 71. Even if it works, how long will she live? A few years? Maybe less. That's a lot of money for a gamble." He wasn't whispering. He said it out loud in front of me like I was an object lying on a table, not their mother fighting to breathe. The doctor's face stiffened with professional discomfort. "Sir, I understand your concerns, but without the procedure, she won't survive." I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind them that I carried them inside my body, that I nursed them through fevers, that I sold my wedding ring just to pay for David's college tuition when his father walked out. But my body betrayed me, and all I could do was gasp for air while my children debated my worth like 2 lawyers negotiating a settlement. Anna placed a hand on David's arm. Her eyes flicked toward me for the briefest second, and then away, as though looking at me too long might break her resolve. "Mom always told us not to waste money on unnecessary things," she said coldly. "Maybe we should honor her wishes. Unnecessary things." She was talking about me, her mother. My heart ached in a way the chest pain never could. The betrayal was not a stab. It was a slow, deliberate strangulation of everything I had believed about family. I thought of the countless nights I stayed awake sewing dresses for neighbors. To pay the rent of the afternoons I went without lunch so they could have a full plate of food, of the time I pawned my mother's necklace just so Anna could have braces. And now my life, my entire being, had been reduced to a line on a bill they didn't want to pay. The doctor pushed the clipboard forward, his voice firmer this time. "She doesn't have time. One of you must decide now. Sign this paper." David pushed it back toward him. "No, we can't afford it. She's old. It's cruel, but it's the truth." His words fell like a hammer on my chest, heavier than the disease that was killing me. I turned my head slightly and looked at Anna, searching for some trace of the daughter I once knew, the little girl who used to climb into my bed after nightmares, the one who once said, "Mom, you're my hero." But all I saw in her eyes was fear and calculation, as if she were standing on the edge of her own financial ruin, and I was the rope she had to cut. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, each thud slower, weaker, as if even my body was agreeing with them, ready to give up. But inside my mind I screamed, not out of fear of dying, but out of disbelief. How could they? How could the children I raised with love, with every ounce of strength in me, stand here and decide that my life wasn't worth saving? Do you understand what it feels like to be told you are too expensive to live? To be looked at like a broken appliance that costs more to repair than to replace? I don't think any pain in the body can match the pain of that realization. And yet, lying there with monitors beeping and the smell of disinfectant burning my nose, something inside me didn't die. Something inside me lit up like a flame hidden under ashes. Because they didn't know the whole story. They didn't know about the policy I had bought quietly years ago, the fund I had built in secret, the truth I had guarded for a moment exactly like this. I could feel it pressing at my chest, not just the pain of my failing heart, but the weight of a secret I was ready to unleash. But I want to ask you this before I go any further. What would you have done in my place? Would you forgive them? Would you let your children walk away after refusing to save your life to keep their bank account safe? Or would you show them the kind of truth that burns like fire and makes them regret every word? If you think what they did to me was a betrayal, write number 1 in the comments. If you think no amount of money can equal a mother's life, then hit that like button right now, because I need to know if anyone out there still believes in love stronger than greed. I am telling you this story because I need you to see what betrayal looks like when it comes wearing the faces of your own children. And I promise you, this is only the beginning. The night they refused to sign for me was the night I stopped being their helpless victim. The night I decided that if they wanted me gone, they were going to learn exactly what it costs to betray the woman who gave them everything. And what came after, well, that's a storm they never saw coming. The night after they refused to sign while I lay in that hospital bed, waiting for a miracle, memories began to play in my head, like a cruel movie. I kept asking myself, how did it come to this? How did my children become strangers who could measure my life in dollars? And as I thought back, I realized the signs had been there long before the hospital lights and the cold refusal. It was a rainy Tuesday 3 months earlier when I first noticed something was wrong. Anna had come over to my little house, the same modest place where she grew up, the place that still smelled faintly of old wood and coffee grounds. I was sitting in the living room mending a torn hem on my blouse when she walked in without knocking. Her hair was wet from the drizzle outside, but her eyes were sharper than ever. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't sit down to talk about her children or her work. No, she went straight to the cabinet where I kept my old tin box, the one I used as a safe for important papers. "Mom," she said casually, too casually, "where do you keep your bank statements these days? You know, with everything getting so digital, it's easy to lose track." I remember looking at her. My needle paused in midair and wondering why she suddenly cared about my bank statements. For years, Anna barely paid attention to my finances. I had always told them I lived modestly, that I had enough to get by with my pension and part-time sewing jobs. That's the image I gave them because I didn't want money to poison our relationships. But that day, her eyes darted nervously around the room, scanning like a detective searching for evidence. I tried to brush it off, but she pressed further. "You know it's important to be transparent with family. If anything happens to you, David and I need to know what you have, what accounts, what properties. It would just make things easier." Something about the way she said, "if anything happens to you," made my skin crawl. It wasn't concern, it wasn't love, it was planning. I smiled weakly and said, "All you need to know is that I have enough to cover myself. You and your brother don't have to worry about me." She gave a tight smile, but I could see the frustration bubbling beneath it. She left soon after, but I noticed she lingered near the cabinet longer than necessary, her fingers brushing the metal box, as if she were memorizing its weight. That night, after she left, I opened the box myself. My hands trembled as I checked the papers inside the insurance policy, the savings certificates, the deeds I had carefully tucked away. Everything was there, untouched, but the look in her eyes haunted me. It was the look of someone who already considered what was inside hers. A week later, David came by unannounced as usual. He carried a 6-pack of beer, but his tone was sober, almost too sober. We sat at the kitchen table, and after a few minutes of small talk, he leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Mom, have you thought about writing a will?" he asked. The question hit me like a punch. I had thought about it, of course, but hearing him say it made me feel like a clock that was already ticking down. "I'm not planning on going anywhere just yet," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of chuckle people use when they think they're smarter than you. "Mom, come on. You're 71. You never know what can happen. And the way things are. You don't want the government taking what should belong to family." Family, he said the word like a threat, not a promise. I changed the subject, but I couldn't shake the unease. That night, I remembered something from when David was little. He was maybe 7 and we were at the grocery store. He had begged me for a chocolate bar and I said no. We didn't have the money. He threw a tantrum right there in the aisle, screaming that I didn't love him because I wouldn't buy him what he wanted. That same selfish fire was still there, only now it burned in a man's body with sharper teeth. The weeks went by and the conversations grew darker. Anna started dropping hints about how expensive nursing homes were, as if preparing the ground for an idea. "Mom, you know it's hard for us to take care of you forever. If your health declines, what will we do? Wouldn't it be better to have a plan?" David echoed her words when he visited next. "It's just practical, Mom. You need to think ahead. None of us are getting younger." Every time they spoke, I felt less like their mother and more like a burden they were preparing to unload. Their words stuck to me like cold sweat, making me shiver even in daylight. The first undeniable crack came one Sunday afternoon at a family lunch. Anna had invited me over, and I went hoping for warmth, hoping maybe I was just imagining things. But what I walked into was a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I arrived a little early and heard voices through the half-open door. Anna and David were in the kitchen, their words sharp, urgent like knives clashing. "She still has that policy, I know it," Anna hissed. "She wouldn't be so calm about bills otherwise," David scoffed. "Then why hasn't she told us what is she hiding? If she dies without telling us, we'll get nothing." "Exactly why we need to push her," Anna said, her voice like acid. "We can't keep wasting our money when she's sitting on something. She should at least make sure we're secure. We've carried her long enough." I froze in the hallway, my breath caught in my throat. Carried me. Those words burned. Had they forgotten who carried them, who worked through sickness, who starved so they could eat? My knees trembled, and I nearly dropped the little pie I had baked for dessert. I stepped back quietly, making noise with the door so they would think I had just arrived. They greeted me with fake smiles, their voices suddenly sweet, but the sweetness tasted rotten. That day, sitting at their table, eating food that tasted like dust in my mouth, I looked at them and realized something terrifying. My children were not my children anymore. They were hunters circling prey, and the prey was me. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things that maybe stress and age were making me paranoid. But deep down, I knew. And when I ended up in the hospital weeks later, gasping for breath, chest aching, and saw the way they looked at each other before refusing to sign, I realized they had been preparing for that moment all along. Do you see how betrayal doesn't fall from the sky? It grows slowly like a shadow spreading across the floor until you are completely covered. That shadow had been creeping into my life for months, and I ignored it because I didn't want to believe my own children could betray me. But I see it now, and I want you to see it too. Because when betrayal comes from the people you gave life to, it doesn't just wound your body, it crushes your soul. The weeks after that Sunday lunch felt like walking on thin glass, every word between us sharp, every silence even sharper. I tried to hold on to the illusion that maybe I was overthinking, that perhaps their questions about money were just the concerns of children worried about their mother's future. But illusions don't survive very long when greed begins to eat away at the truth. One afternoon, I had a doctor's appointment for a checkup, and Anna insisted on driving me. It felt unusual. She rarely offered to take time off work for me. She smiled too brightly, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly as we moved through traffic. The hospital smell once we arrived made me anxious. I could feel her impatience as we waited for the doctor. She wasn't asking about my health, not really. She was waiting. When the doctor finally stepped out of his office and called my name, Anna leaned forward and said, "Remember to ask about costs, Mom. Everything is so expensive these days." Her tone wasn't worried. It was cold rehearsed, like she had been saying it to herself in the mirror. Inside, while the doctor checked my heart and lungs, I overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. Through the thin wall, voices carried. Anna had pulled the doctor aside in the hallway, her voice a low whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the door. She doesn't need any risky procedures, does she? At her age, it's better not to waste resources, right? Be honest with me. I froze. Waste resources. That was what I had become. The doctor cleared his throat uneasy. Your mother has options. She's not hopeless. With proper care. Anna interrupted. But the costs. We don't have endless money. Isn't it better to let nature take its course than to put her through something she might not even survive? I sat there on the exam table, my paper gown rustling as I shook, listening to my daughter discuss my life like it was a business transaction. When Anna returned, she plastered on her polite smile and asked if I was ready to go. I nodded, but my heart wasn't beating the same anymore. Not from illness, but from betrayal. A few days later, I received a phone call that confirmed my fears. It was Mrs. Jensen, an old neighbor and friend who had once babysat Anna when she was a toddler. Her voice trembled with hesitation. I don't know if I should tell you this, but I overheard your children the other night. She explained that she had seen David and Anna having dinner at a restaurant in town. They weren't talking about family or memories. They were talking about me. They said something about your house and insurance, Mrs. Jensen whispered. They said you must have hidden something and they need to find out before it's too late. I thanked her, my throat tight. My fingers numb as I held the phone. I already suspected it, but hearing it from someone else made it real. My children weren't just thinking about my future care. They were hunting for what I might leave behind. The truth began to reveal itself in small fragments like shards of broken glass glinting in the sun. David came over one evening and lingered by my bookshelf. His eyes weren't on the books, they were on the locked drawer at the bottom where I kept some papers. He tapped it with his knuckle, pretending to dust off the surface. You know, Mom, sometimes it's best to keep important documents in a bank vault. People your age can get forgetful. Forgetful? He said it like an accusation, not a possibility. I looked at him directly and asked, What documents are you talking about? He smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't. Oh, just, you know anything. Property deeds, insurance policies. We just want to make sure everything is safe. For you. But I knew what he meant. For them. The pressure grew heavier with each passing day. Phone calls that started with small talk ended with subtle questions. Do you have any debts? Mom, are you still paying life insurance? Have you thought about selling the house to make things easier? Easier for whom? It was during one of these calls that I heard the final confirmation, though they didn't know I was listening. I had left the phone on speaker by accident, or maybe fate made it so. After they thought I had hung up, I heard Anna sigh and whisper to David, If she doesn't tell us soon, we'll have to check ourselves. She can't hide it forever. The words slammed into me like a car crash. They weren't even ashamed. They weren't even hiding it from each other. And then came the moment that shattered the last piece of denial in me. One evening, as I prepared tea, I heard voices outside the kitchen window. The curtains fluttered, and through the glass I saw David standing near the porch, speaking on his phone. His words were low, but the night was still. Yes, I know it's risky, he muttered. But if we can prove she's not competent, we'll have control over everything. The house, the accounts, all of it. It's not like she has decades left. It's practical. My knees weakened and I nearly dropped the teapot. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were preparing to strip me of my rights before I was even gone. That night, lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about all the sacrifices, all the years I gave them. And I asked myself, was it all wasted? Did I raise them wrong? Or had greed infected them like a sickness I couldn't cure? I don't know what hurt more, the words I overheard or the realization that they felt entitled to everything I had worked for. I remembered the time when David was a boy and Anna a teenager, and I walked 2 miles in the snow to bring them food after a late shift. I remembered tucking them into bed, promising I'd always protect them. And now those same children were plotting to take everything from me, even my dignity. The escalation was no longer hidden. It was out in the open, whispered in hallways, muttered on phone calls, hinted at in every conversation. They wanted my money. They wanted my house. And they wanted me weak enough not to fight back. Do you see how betrayal grows? It starts as suspicion, then becomes conversation, then becomes strategy. And when I realized my own children were strategizing against me, I knew the storm was coming. I want to ask you, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you confront them? Would you let them think they had control? Or would you wait in silence? Gather your strength and prepare to show them that a mother's love can forgive, but a mother's betrayal will never go unpunished. If you think I should expose them, write number 1 in the comments. If you think I should have faith in their change, then press like. Because what I heard in those whispered conversations was not just greed, it was the sound of a noose tightening around my neck. After overhearing their whispers and phone calls, the world around me didn't look the same anymore. My own home, my own kitchen, felt like a stage where my children rehearsed lines for a play I wasn't invited to. Every smile they gave me felt hollow. Every question about my health sounded like a veiled calculation, and the isolation began to close in on me like walls, moving inward, slow but relentless. At first, it was small things. Anna stopped calling just to ask how I was feeling. Now, whenever her number lit up on my phone, the conversations always circled back to money. "Mom, are you sure you don't need help paying your bills?" She'd ask, her tone dipped in false concern. But I knew what she wanted: confirmation that I had no hidden funds, that I was as poor and dependent as she needed me to be. David grew colder too. He used to come by with his children, filling the house with laughter, but now he arrived alone, often late at night, checking corners of my living room as if searching for something. Once I caught him sliding open the drawer of my desk. When I cleared my throat, he jolted and slammed it shut, muttering, "Just looking for a pen." The drawer had no pens, only documents. Their words became sharper, no longer coated with sweetness. One evening, we sat around Anna's dining table for what was supposed to be a family dinner. The food was lavish: roast beef, glazed carrots, and wine that tasted more bitter than sweet in my mouth. Midway through the meal, David leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on me with the coldness of a man calculating numbers, not memories. "Mom," he said, his voice steady, "have you thought about what happens if you can't take care of yourself? You know, nursing homes are expensive. We can't cover that. You should think about selling the house while you still can. It would solve a lot of problems." The table went silent. I felt every pair of eyes on me. Anna's sharp gaze, her husband's curious glance, even the children too young to understand watching me as though waiting for my answer. My throat tightened. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I felt the tremor slip through. "This house is my home. I raised you here. I am not selling it." David shrugged his lips, curling into a smirk. "Then don't expect us to pick up the pieces when everything falls apart." The words stung like acid poured onto open wounds. I looked at Anna, hoping she might soften the blow, but she only nodded in agreement. "He's right, Mom. We can't carry you forever. You have to be realistic." "Carry me." That phrase again. As though the woman who had given them life, who worked herself to the bone so they could eat and study and dream, was now a sack of stones, dragging them into the ground. I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. The roast beef smelled like iron, like blood. I felt the walls of that elegant dining room closing in on me, turning into a cage. And at that moment, I realized I wasn't just being questioned, I was being judged, tried, and sentenced all at once by the very people who once called me mother. The isolation deepened after that night. They began to treat me less like family and more like an outsider lingering in their world. Invitations to dinners became scarce. Phone calls were shorter. When they did visit, their eyes wandered around my house, searching corners as if the walls themselves might whisper where I had hidden something. One morning, Anna arrived unannounced with a stack of brochures in her purse. She laid them out on my kitchen table one by one with glossy pictures of smiling, elderly people in spotless retirement communities. "Look, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with fake cheer. "These places are wonderful. They have nurses' activities, even fitness programs. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I stared at the photos, the happy strangers with their staged laughter, and felt bile rise in my throat. "I'm not moving into one of these places," I said firmly. Her smile vanished in an instant, replaced by that cold edge I had begun to know too well. "Mom, You're being stubborn. It's not safe for you to live alone anymore. What if something happens? We can't always be there." My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from fury. "You're not there now," I snapped. The words surprised even me. The silence that followed was thick, and in Anna's eyes, I saw something darker than disappointment. I saw resolve like a predator deciding it was time to strike. A week later, the pressure became unbearable. David showed up with Anna, both of them standing in my living room like lawyers about to present a case. "Mom, we've been talking." David began, his voice calm but deadly. "It's time to think about what's best for everyone. You can't keep dragging this out." "Dragging what out?" I asked, though I already knew. Anna stepped closer, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. "Your health, your future. We need to know what resources you actually have. If you're hiding something, it's not fair to us. We need to plan. We have families too." I felt my chest tighten, not from illness, but from rage. "My resources are mine." I said each word slow and deliberate. David's mask slipped just for a moment. His jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with anger. "You're being selfish. After everything we've done for you, you'd let us struggle while you sit on—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. After everything they had done for me, the irony almost made me laugh. But the sound died in my throat, replaced by tears I refused to let fall. From that day on, the isolation wasn't just emotional, it was physical. They stopped visiting for weeks, leaving me alone in a house that felt colder than ever. The phone rang less, and when it did, their words were clipped impatient. I found myself sitting by the window at night, staring at the streetlights, wondering when my children had turned into strangers. The loneliness was crushing. I remembered when Anna was 10 and caught the flu. I sat by her bed all night, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering that she'd be okay. I remembered when David broke his arm in a football game, and I carried him into the emergency room, refusing to let him feel alone in his pain. And now, when my body was breaking, when my spirit was bruised, I sat alone, waiting for children who no longer cared if I lived or died. Do you know what it feels like to be erased while you're still breathing? To be treated as though you're already gone? That is what they did to me. And it was killing me more slowly than any illness. The pressure reached its peak one evening when Anna called. Her voice was sharp and patient. "Mom, we need an answer. Are you going to sell the house or not? Because if you're not, we can't help you anymore. You'll be on your own." My hand shook as I held the phone, but my voice came out steady. "I've been on my own for a long time." And I hung up. When I set the phone down, my chest ached, my breath ragged. The house around me seemed to sigh with me, the walls holding secrets I wasn't ready to share. They thought they had isolated me, broken me down, made me weak enough to surrender. But what they didn't know was that every insult, every betrayal, every cold word was building something inside me, a storm. And soon that storm would no longer stay hidden. The night it all came crashing down, the air inside the hospital was so cold, it felt like it was freezing my bones from the inside out. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting everything in a harsh, unflattering glow. Machines beeped steadily, each sound a reminder of how fragile my body had become. My chest felt like it was caving in with every breath, each inhale sharp, each exhale weaker than the one before. I could taste metal in my mouth, bitter and sour, the flavor of fear. I remember the doctor's voice cutting through the noise of my own heartbeat. "She needs surgery immediately. There is no time left. Without it, she won't survive the night." His words were steady, professional, but I saw the urgency in his eyes. He wasn't speaking in metaphors or exaggerations. He meant it. He turned to Anna and David, who stood at the foot of my bed like two executioners, deciding whether to pull the lever. My gaze followed his. I searched their faces for compassion, for panic, for love. Instead, I saw calculation. Anna crossed her arms, her jaw tight, her lips pursed into a thin line. David shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the clipboard the doctor held, as though the paper itself carried the weight of a death sentence not for me, but for their bank accounts. The doctor held out the consent form pen, poised and repeated, "I need one of you to sign." The silence that followed was unbearable. The only sounds were the beeping of the monitors and the pounding of my own pulse. I wanted to scream, to tear out the IV, to grab their hands and force the pen between their fingers. But I couldn't move. My body was failing and my children were watching me drown without lifting a hand. Finally, David spoke his voice, low, deliberate, each word slicing into me like a blade. What's the guarantee she'll make it through? She's 71. Even if she survives, what kind of life will she have? Weak, dependent, on medication. That's not living. That's prolonging suffering. Suffering. As though my existence was a burden they could measure, calculate, and discard. The doctor's voice hardened. Sir, if we do nothing, she dies. Tonight. Anna finally looked at me, but it wasn't the look of a daughter about to lose her mother. It was the look of someone doing math. Her eyes scanned my face not with love, but with cold detachment, as though she were evaluating a piece of furniture. Then she turned back to the doctor and said, $50,000 for what a gamble. Her words echoed in my head louder than the machines, louder than the pain. A gamble. That's what I had become to them. The doctor placed the pen on the clipboard, his expression stern. You need to decide now. David shook his head and pushed the clipboard back. No, it's not worth it. I couldn't breathe. Not because of my failing heart, but because of theirs. My children, the ones I carried for 9 months each, the ones I fed when there wasn't enough food for me, the ones I clothed when I had holes in my own shoes, they were standing there refusing to save me. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked, breaking under the weight of despair. Please. I'm your mother. Anna flinched just slightly, but her lips tightened further. We can't bankrupt ourselves for a surgery that won't change anything, she said. I closed my eyes and memories flooded in like a cruel slideshow. I saw Anna as a little girl clutching my hand on her first day of school, terrified of letting go. I saw David when he broke his arm, crying in my lap as I kissed away his tears. I saw the birthdays I scraped together pennies to celebrate the Christmas mornings, where I worked double shifts just to afford one gift for each of them. And now, in this sterile hospital room, all those years of sacrifice had been erased, replaced by a single calculation not worth it. Worth. The doctor tried again, his patience thinning. Without this surgery, she will die. Are you certain? David's voice didn't waver. We're certain. I thought my heart couldn't break any further, but it did. The monitor beeped faster, my pulse erratic as though my body itself was panicking in response to their betrayal. I turned my head, tears spilling down the side of my face, and whispered to no one in particular. So this is how it ends. The nurse shifted uncomfortably. I could see the horror in her eyes as she glanced at me, then at my children. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but the doctor placed a hand on her arm, a silent command to remain professional. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just sick. I was abandoned, betrayed, left to die not by strangers, but by the very people who should have been fighting for me. Do you understand what that does to a soul? To know your children see your death as more convenient than your life, that they would rather save money than save you. My breathing grew shallower, each inhale scraping my lungs like sandpaper. The room blurred at the edges, and yet beneath the pain, beneath the despair, something else sparked. A fire. A storm rising in my chest, not of sickness, but of fury, because they didn't know everything. They thought I was helpless, powerless, dependent. They thought they had cornered me, stripped me of choice, and decided my fate. But they didn't know the truth I carried like a hidden weapon. They didn't know about the policy. They didn't know about the fund. They didn't know about the proof I had quietly gathered, the words I had recorded, the documents I had secured. Even as my body faltered, my mind sharpened. I realized that their refusal, their betrayal, wasn't just cruelty. It was the final piece I needed. Proof. Witnesses. A scene that no one could deny if I ever revealed it. And so, lying there with death pressing at my chest, I made a silent vow. If I survived this night, if I drew one more breath beyond these sterile walls, I would make them regret every word, every hesitation, every cold calculation. I would show them what it means when a mother they thought was weak decides to fight back. I want to ask you, what would you do if you were lying in that bed, your children refusing to save you? Would you close your eyes and forgive them as the light faded? Or would you let the fire inside you ignite and promise yourself that if you lived, you would make sure the world saw them for who they truly were? If you believe no mother deserves to be left like this, write number 1 in the comments. If you believe betrayal like this deserves to be exposed, then press like, because I need to know you are with me, that you would not stand by silently the way my children did. That night, the doctor's scrambled nurses whispered, and my children stood cold and unmoved. But in my heart, even as I felt the darkness closing in, I knew the story wasn't over. They thought they had ended me, but they had only awakened something stronger than they could ever imagine. The night they refused to sign, I thought it was the end. My breath was shallow, my chest burning my body, betraying me just as my children had. I remember closing my eyes, half ready to let go, and yet something deep inside me refused to die. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the stubborn heartbeat of a mother who had given too much to leave this world on her children's terms. The doctors stabilized me with temporary measures. They couldn't operate without consent, but they bought me hours, maybe a day. When the worst passed and the pain dulled to a heavy throb, I knew I had been given something rare time. Time to think, time to plan, time to decide what kind of ending my story would have. I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, listening to the low hum of machines. My mind replayed everything I had overheard in the past months, the whispers, the suggestions, the brochures, the threats. It all fit together now, like a cruel puzzle. They weren't just negligent. They weren't just selfish. They were prepared to strip me of my dignity and leave me to die if it meant protecting their own comfort. And that realization snapped something inside me. I was no longer begging for their love. I was no longer hoping for their mercy. I was preparing for war, because what they didn't know, what they had never even suspected, was that I had built a life behind the mask of weakness they thought was real. Years earlier, after my husband left and I was left to raise Anna and David alone, I made a choice. I promised myself that I would never be powerless again. Quietly, without telling anyone, I invested the little money I scraped together. I worked late nights sewing for neighbors, taking odd jobs, and putting every spare dollar into a policy and a fund managed by a lawyer I trusted more than my own blood. His name was Mr. Allen, a man with gray hair and kind eyes who told me once, "Sometimes the best armor is invisibility. Let them think you have nothing and you'll see who they really are." So I let my children believe I was poor. I let them believe I was dependent on the tiny pension and the occasional help they gave. I drove an old car. I wore secondhand clothes. I cooked simple meals. I lived the life of a woman with nothing to give but love. And all the while, I built a safety net that only I and Mr. Allen knew about. That night in the hospital, as my body struggled, I realized the invisibility had done its job. It had revealed my children's true faces. They didn't treat me like a burden because they thought I had nothing. They treated me like a burden because in their hearts they had nothing. No loyalty, no compassion, no humanity left. I knew what I had to do. The next morning when the doctor came to check on me, I asked him for something simple privacy. He seemed surprised, but he nodded and told the nurse to clear the room. Alone, I reached for the drawer in the bedside table where my purse had been left. My fingers trembled, not from weakness, but from resolve. I pulled out a small black phone, an old model one my children mocked me for keeping instead of upgrading. What they didn't know was that inside it were recordings. For weeks, I had been pressing record during conversations, the Sunday lunch whispers, David's phone call on the porch, Anna's words to the doctor about not wasting resources. I had them all. Every poisonous word captured forever. As I scrolled through the files listening to their voices betray me again, I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness this time, but from something sharper, determination. I called Mr. Allen. His voice was steady as ever. "I was expecting your call, though I hoped it would never come," he said. I told him everything, every word they had spoken, every refusal, every attempt to erase me. There was a long pause on the line, and then he said, "You have more power than you think. You've prepared for this. Now we use it." We spoke for an hour, planning carefully. He would secure the recordings, back them up, and prepare documents that could not be challenged. He would bring in witnesses. And most importantly, he would make sure that if my children ever tried to declare me incompetent, they would face a storm they could never weather. When I hung up, I felt lighter, though my body was still heavy with pain. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like myself. Again, not the fragile old woman they thought I was, but the mother who had built her life from ashes, who had raised 2 children alone, who had survived abandonment and poverty. I was still that woman, and I wasn't going to die quietly. That evening, Anna came by. She walked into the hospital room with her fake smile, carrying a bouquet of flowers she probably picked up at the grocery store on the way. She placed them on the table and sat down, her eyes darting to the machines, to my face, to the clipboard on the counter. "How are you feeling, Mom?" she asked, her tone polite, rehearsed. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I didn't feel the sting of betrayal. I felt clarity. I saw her not as my daughter, but as a woman who had already chosen greed over blood. And I realized something important. I didn't need her anymore. "I'm alive," I said simply, my voice steady. Her eyes flickered just slightly at the firmness in my tone. She tried to probe, asking about the doctor's recommendations, about costs, about whether I had thought about options. I smiled faintly, giving nothing away. Inside, I was already miles ahead of her. When she left, David came the next day. His face was harder, his questions blunter. "Mom, we can't keep dragging this out. You need to make decisions. What are you hiding?" I almost laughed. What am I hiding, if only he knew? But instead of answering, I looked him in the eyes and said, "You'll know soon enough." His brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. For the first time, it was him who looked unsettled, not me. That was the turning point. The moment I shifted from the victim in their story to the author of my own. I was no longer begging them to save me. I was preparing to save myself, and in doing so, expose them to the world. And I want you to think about this. What would you have done? Would you continue to play weak, to let them believe they had won, so you could gather the strength to strike back? Or would you have confronted them right then and there, tearing the mask off their faces in that hospital room? If you think I was right to prepare in silence, write number 1 in the comments. If you think I should have exposed them, immediately hit like. Because the truth is, revenge is not always loud. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is patience, sharpened into a blade. That night, as I drifted into a restless sleep, I whispered to myself, "You thought I was powerless. You thought I was dying, but I'm still here. And when the time comes, you'll see exactly who you tried to destroy." They thought they had cornered me. They thought they had silenced me. But what they really did was give me the fuel I needed to rise again. The storm was no longer coming. It was already here, gathering strength in the silence, waiting for the moment to strike. The first confrontation happened quietly behind a closed hospital door, without witnesses, without the safety of an audience. It was just me and Anna, the daughter I once believed would never turn her back on me. And in that silence, the truth between us was sharper than any scalpel the doctors might have used. She came late in the evening when the corridors were dim and most visitors had gone home. The bouquet she had brought the day before was already wilting in the vase, its petals curling like secrets kept too long. She walked in with that same composed expression, but I noticed the tightness around her eyes, the way she clutched her purse, as if holding on to something more than leather and fabric. "Mom," she said softly, almost tenderly, "how are you tonight?" I studied her for a long moment before answering. I could see the act in her face, the performance of a caring daughter, and it made my stomach twist. "I'm alive," I said. Just those 2 words. She shifted in the chair by my bed, crossing her legs, adjusting her blouse stalling. Then she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Mom, I need to know. Do you have something hidden? Money policies, anything? Because if you do, we should know. It would make things easier for everyone. Easier, that word again. Always about ease, convenience, never about love or loyalty. I looked her straight in the eyes, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. Tell me, Anna. I said slowly what exactly would be easier. Watching me die without guilt, selling the house before I'm even in the ground, claiming money you didn't earn. Her face paled, but her lips stayed firm. That's not fair, she whispered. We've taken care of you for years. I almost laughed, the sound bitter in my throat. Taking care of me by sending me scraps and calling them gifts, by showing up when it's convenient and disappearing when it's not. Tell me, when did you start seeing me as a burden instead of a mother? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, the mask cracked. The daughter, who used to cry in my arms after nightmares, was gone. In her place was a woman hardened by greed and fear, a woman who couldn't see me as anything more than an obstacle to her comfort. Mom, she said finally, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound firm, you have to understand we can't keep sacrificing everything. We have our families, our lives. We can't throw away money we don't have. And so I interrupted, my voice sharp. You decided my life wasn't worth the cost. Silence fell. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. Her eyes dropped to the floor, her hands clutched tighter around her purse, and that was all the answer I needed. I leaned forward slightly, pain shooting through my chest, but resolve keeping me steady. You looked me in the eyes, Anna, and you weighed my life like it was a number on a ledger. You let greed speak louder than love, and that's something I will never forget. She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand, stopping her cold. No more lies. No more excuses. I heard you. I heard the way you talked to the doctor about not wasting resources. I heard the way you whispered with your brother about what I might be hiding. I heard every word. Do you want me to play them for you? Her eyes snapped up to mine, wide, startled. What do you mean? I let a faint smile curl at the edge of my lips. I recorded you, Anna, all of it. Every word of betrayal, every plan, every cold calculation. I may be old, but I am not blind, I am not deaf, and I am certainly not stupid. Her face drained of color, her breath catching in her throat. She sat frozen like a child caught stealing candy, only this time the theft was not sweet but rotten. You think you've won. I continued, my voice calm but edged with steel. You think you've cornered me, made me weak enough to surrender. But you've forgotten who I am. I am the woman who raised you alone, who worked nights to feed you, who gave up everything so you could have a life. I survived betrayal before, and I will survive this. The difference is, this time I will not stay silent. Her hands trembled on her lap, her eyes glassy with something between anger and fear. She whispered, Mom, please. You don't understand. But I cut her off again, my tone final. No, Anna, it's you who doesn't understand. You think this is about money, about houses, about inheritance. But it's not. It's about dignity. Mine. And you will not take that from me. For the first time, she had no words. She just sat there staring at me, her lips parted but silent, her carefully rehearsed lines abandoned. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, until finally she stood her chair, scraping the floor. She grabbed her purse and moved toward the door, her movements jerky, unsettled. At the threshold, she turned back, her voice low and shaking. You'll regret this, Mom. I met her gaze unwavering. No, Anna, one day you'll regret this. And with that, she left the door clicking shut behind her, leaving me alone with the steady beep of the monitor and the fire burning in my chest. That night, as I lay awake staring into the darkness, I knew the private battle had been fought. She now understood that I was not the weak old woman she thought she could manipulate. The recordings, the truth, the strength, she never suspected it, was all there waiting. The next battle, though, would not be private. It would be public. And when the world saw what my children had done, when their words and actions were laid bare before witnesses, there would be no hiding. No excuses, no masks left to wear. The second confrontation was nothing like the first. Where the first had been whispered in the shadow of a hospital room, this one unfolded under the harsh lights of truth, in front of eyes that could never unsee ears that could never unhear. If Climax 1 was the strike of a blade in the dark, Climax 2 was the explosion of thunder in broad daylight. It happened 2 days later when the hospital called for a family conference. The doctors wanted clarity because my condition had worsened and decisions needed to be made. They invited Anna and David, of course, but also the attending physician, 2 nurses, a social worker, and without my children's knowledge, my lawyer, Mr. Allen, whom I had asked to come. The small conference room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, its white walls echoing with the tension that hung in the air. Anna arrived first, her heels clicking against the linoleum, her face painted with an expression of weary concern. David followed his shoulders, squared his jaw, set the mask of a man prepared to be practical, not emotional. They sat across from me at the table, flanking each other like twin prosecutors, ready to present their case. The doctor began, his voice steady, professional. "Your mother's condition remains critical. We cannot proceed without family consent. We need to know your decision." I watched as Anna exchanged a glance with David, their silent conversation passing between them like smoke. Then Anna spoke, her voice soft, measured. "We've thought long and hard. We don't think surgery is the right option. It's too much risk, too much cost. We love our mother, but we have to be realistic." David nodded, his agreement blunt. "We can't throw away money for something that probably won't change anything. She's lived a long life. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let go." The words hung in the air, heavy and vile, settling over the room like a suffocating fog. The nurses shifted uncomfortably. The social worker's pen froze on her notepad, and I sat there, my hands folded calmly in my lap, my heart pounding not with fear, but with anticipation. For a moment there was silence. Then I leaned forward, my voice steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. "So that's it then. My life is too expensive. My existence is too much of a burden. You've weighed me against your wallets and found me unworthy." Anna flinched, her mask cracking just slightly. "Mom, it's not like that." "Isn't it?" I interrupted, my eyes locking onto hers. Then I turned to David. "You said it yourself. I'm 71, a gamble not worth taking. I heard every word, and so will they." I reached into the small bag on my lap and pulled out my old black phone. Slowly, deliberately, I pressed play. The room filled with Anna's voice captured in cold clarity. "She doesn't need any risky procedures, does she? At her age, it's better not to waste resources, right?" Gasps rippled across the room. The nurse's eyes widened. The doctor's jaw tightened. Anna's face drained of color. Before she could protest, David's voice followed, recorded on the porch of my house. "If we can prove she's not competent, we'll have control over everything. The house, the accounts, all of it. It's not like she has decades left. It's practical." The words reverberated in the sterile room, poisoning the air with their cruelty. The silence that followed was unbearable, broken only by the stifled gasp of the social worker. Anna surged forward, her hands trembling. "That's taken out of context." I cut her off again, my voice rising, fueled by months of pain. Out of context, the context is betrayal. The context is my children plotting my death while standing in the house. I built for them, eating the food. I worked myself sick to provide. The context is you refusing to sign the paper that would save me because you wanted to save your bank accounts. Her mouth snapped shut, her face crumpling under the weight of truth. David tried to recover his voice, rough, defensive. "Mom, you don't understand. We were just talking. Just worried about what," I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. "Not about me. Never about me. Only about yourselves. Your comfort. Your convenience. Your inheritance." The lawyer, Mr. Allen, cleared his throat and placed a stack of documents on the table, his calm presence like a hammer about to fall. For the record, he said smoothly, "Mrs. Harris is of sound mind and has retained me for over a decade to manage her assets. She has recordings, documents, and witnesses that prove her children have been planning to undermine her autonomy and withhold medical care for financial gain. The words hit like a bomb. Anna's face crumpled, David's eyes darted wildly, and the room seemed to shrink under the weight of exposure. The doctor finally spoke, his voice cold with disapproval. I cannot make decisions for families, but I will say this refusing life-saving surgery for financial reasons is not only unethical, it's unconscionable. Mrs. Harris, if you consent, we can proceed without them. I nodded slowly, tears brimming in my eyes, but my voice steady. Yes, proceed. I want to live, and I want the world to know who my children really are. Anna broke then, her voice trembling, tears spilling as she reached across the table. Mom, please, we didn't mean it like that. We were scared, we didn't know what to do. But I pulled my hands away, firm, unyielding. No, Anna. You knew exactly what you were doing. Fear doesn't make people cruel. Greed does. And you chose greed. David's face twisted, anger rising now that the mask had fallen completely. So what, Mom? You've been hiding money from us all these years, pretending to be poor while we struggled. You lied to us. His words came out like an accusation, but they revealed more about him than about me, and I smiled faintly, bitterly. Yes, David, I lied. I let you believe I had nothing. And in that lie, I discovered the truth about both of you, that without money, without inheritance, you have no love left. And now everyone here knows it too. The room was silent except for the sound of Anna's sobs and the steady hum of the air conditioning. The nurses avoided my children's eyes. The social worker scribbled furiously on her notepad. The doctor's expression was unreadable, but the weight of his judgment hung heavy in the air. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in months' power. The power of truth, of exposure, of dignity reclaimed. I turned to the doctor and nodded again. Schedule the surgery, and Mr. Allen make sure every one of these recordings is secured. I want no doubt left about what happened here today. Anna tried one last time, her voice breaking. Mom, please. We can change. We can do better. I looked at her, and for a fleeting second, I remembered the little girl clutching my hand, the child who once said I was her hero. But that little girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had measured my life in dollars, and I couldn't bring her back. You will live with what you've done, I said softly. And one day, when you're old and alone, you'll understand the weight of betrayal. But by then, it will be too late. The meeting ended. The doctor gathered his notes, the nurses quietly filed out, and Mr. Allen packed the documents with calm precision. Anna sat hunched in her chair, sobbing silently. David stood rigid, fists clenched, his anger simmering without a target. And I sat tall, frail body but unbroken spirit, knowing that for the first time in years I had spoken my truth without fear. That was the moment the mask shattered completely. There was no going back, no repair, no pretending. The private betrayal had become a public scandal, and my children would never escape the shadow of what they had done. And as I was wheeled back to my room, the monitors beeping beside me, I felt something like peace. Not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped losing. News of what happened in that hospital conference room did not stay locked within four walls. Secrets once torn open bleed into the air, staining everything they touch. And my children's betrayal, spoken in their own voices, was no longer just my private wound. It had become a spectacle, a story that spread like wildfire through corridors, neighbors' whispers, and eventually the very community they had once wanted to impress. It began with the nurses. They had been in the room silent but wide-eyed as the recordings played. Their discomfort turned to disgust as Anna's words about wasting resources and David's scheme about proving incompetence spilled into the open. When the meeting ended, I could see it in their faces. They no longer looked at me as just another patient. They looked at me with respect, with pity, with outrage on my behalf. That night, as they checked my vitals, one nurse squeezed my hand gently and whispered, "Don't worry, Mrs. Harris. We've seen everything. People will know the truth." Her eyes glistened, and for the first time in days, I felt warmth from someone who wasn't tied to me by blood, but by humanity. The fire spread down the hallways of the hospital. Staff talk travels faster than any news broadcast. By morning, orderlies, technicians, even the cafeteria workers had heard the story of the old woman whose children tried to let her die to save money. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others muttered curses under their breath when Anna and David walked by. The social worker filed her notes immediately. By law, she was required to document what she had witnessed: children attempting to withhold care for financial reasons, potential exploitation of an elderly parent, conversations suggesting coercion. Her report would not just sit in a drawer. It would enter the system, the kind of system that could summon court's guardians, even the police if needed. And then Mr. Allen, my lawyer, made his move. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply walked out of that room with the recording secured and the documents ready, and by the next day my children received notice. Any attempt to claim my assets, any attempt to interfere with my medical care would result in legal action. Their faces when they read those papers turned ashen, their bravado evaporating like mist under sunlight. But the fire did not stop at legal documents. It leapt into the community because betrayal leaves footprints everywhere. My neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, the one who had overheard them whispering weeks earlier, heard the whole story from a nurse she knew. She wasted no time telling others. Soon the grocery store clerks were whispering about it, the church congregation murmuring after service. The very people Anna had once bragged to about her designer handbags, and David about his sacrifices for family. The betrayal became a mirror held up for all to see. People who had admired them now looked with narrowed eyes. Invitations dried up. Friends avoided them. At the country club, Anna loved to flaunt whispers followed her like shadows. That's the one who refused to save her mother. But the witness I cherished most was not a neighbor, not a nurse, not even the social worker. It was a woman named Grace, a young intern at the hospital who had been in the back of the conference room. She came to my bedside one afternoon hesitant, at first clutching a notebook to her chest. "Mrs. Harris," she said softly, "I just want you to know, I heard everything, and I can testify if you ever need me. I couldn't believe what they said. No one deserves that. No mother." Her voice trembled with sincerity. I looked at her at the fresh hope in her eyes and felt something break and heal all at once inside me. Strangers saw me more clearly than my own children did. The fire kept spreading. A local journalist, tipped off by a hospital worker, reached out to Mr. Allen. Soon there were questions, then articles. The headline was brutal: "Children refuse life-saving surgery for mother over cost." Beneath it, quotes from the recording stripped of context but dripping with truth. Anna and David were furious, of course. They called me, their voices sharp with panic. "Mom, how could you? How could you let this get out? Do you know what this is doing to us?" I listened, calm, my heart steady. "What it's doing to you," I said coldly, "is showing the world who you really are. I didn't do this. You did." Their anger turned to desperation. Anna cried, begging me to retract, to clarify, to save their reputations. David raged, threatening lawsuits, threatening to cut me off completely, as if there was anything left to cut. But the truth had already escaped, and the truth does not go back into hiding once light has touched it. The witnesses kept coming. My church friends visited me at the hospital, their faces lined with sorrow but also pride. One of them, a woman my age, named Margaret, held my hand and said, "You've shown us all something we needed to see. That silence only protects betrayal, but your courage protects dignity." Even my grandchildren, too young to understand at first, overheard whispers at school. Their classmates had read the headlines their teachers exchanged, knowing looks. The children came to me confused, asking why people were saying their parents didn't love me. My heart broke for them, innocent victims of their parents' greed. But I told them the truth in words they could carry without shame. Love is shown in actions. And sometimes adults forget what love means. The fire of exposure burned every facade my children had built. The proud son, the devoted daughter, they were ashes, now reduced to the raw truth everyone could see. And I, for the first time in years, I was no longer invisible. People who once overlooked me now nodded with respect. Nurses lingered by my bed to talk. Neighbors dropped by with flowers, not because they pitied me, but because they admired the strength it took to stand against betrayal. I turned to the camera inside my mind, to you the listener, and asked, "Do you see now why silence is dangerous? Do you see why we must speak even when it hurts?" Because the moment I played those recordings, my betrayal became a warning for others, and the witnesses carried it further than I ever could alone. If you think betrayal should never be hidden, write number 1 in the comments. If you believe exposing the truth is the only way to burn away lies press-like, because I promise you, if I had stayed silent, my story would have ended in that hospital bed, erased and forgotten. But now it lives on in the voices of everyone who saw everyone, who heard everyone, who will never let Anna and David rewrite what they did. The fire had spread, and with it justice. The storm that began in that hospital room did not end when I signed the consent form for my surgery. No, it only gathered strength, sweeping through every corner of my children's lives until there was no shelter left for them to hide. Betrayal carries consequences, and once exposed, those consequences burn hotter than any fire. The first blow was social. Anna, who had once paraded herself at church luncheons and charity galas as the picture of a devoted daughter, found the doors closing on her. People she once called friends began to avoid her calls to cross the street rather than greet her. At the country club she loved so dearly, whispers followed her every step. That's the one who tried to let her mother die to save money. No amount of makeup or jewelry could cover the stain of those words. David suffered too. At his office, colleagues read the headline and listened to the leaked recordings. Meetings grew colder, promotions slipped through his fingers, and even the casual camaraderie at lunch evaporated. He was no longer David, the dependable employee. He was David, the man who abandoned his own mother, and that reputation clung to him like smoke he could never wash off. But the social shame was only the beginning. Mr. Allen, my lawyer, moved swiftly with the documents and recordings. He filed for legal protection on my behalf, ensuring that any attempt to seize control of my assets would be blocked. The court recognized the danger of exploitation, and within weeks the roles had reversed. The children, who once tried to declare me incompetent, were now being investigated for elder abuse. The police came once asking me questions gently, carefully. I told them the truth, that I had recordings that my children had openly discussed withholding care and declaring me incapable. They nodded solemnly, their pens scratching across notepads, their eyes reflecting the kind of pity reserved not for the weak, but for the betrayed. Anna and David received notices of investigation. Their voices rose in panic on the phone, calling me, pleading, demanding, even threatening. "Mom, how could you do this? We're your children," David shouted one night. I listened, calm, my heart steady. "You stopped being my children the moment you chose greed over love," I said softly, and I hung up. The financial consequences followed soon after. The inheritance they had counted on like vultures circling a meal was gone, not because I was dying, but because I was living. Mr. Allen helped me restructure everything. My assets were placed into a trust that would bypass them, completely redirected to causes I cared about, to organizations that protected the elderly from the very kind of exploitation I had endured. When the papers were finalized, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. My wealth was no longer a weapon they could use against me. It had become a shield protecting not just me, but others like me. And yet the sharpest consequences were not legal or financial. They were personal. Anna's husband, ashamed of the scandal, left her. He took the children not because he hated her, but because he didn't want them raised in a house stained by such betrayal. David's wife stayed, but the marriage was fractured, brittle, built on a foundation of shame that cracked with every new whisper in their neighborhood. They had wanted to secure comfort, but instead they lost it all. Reputation security family. The very things they thought they were preserving by letting me go had been destroyed by their own hands. And me, I survived the surgery. I woke in recovery with pain in my body, but a fire in my spirit. I was alive not because of them, but in spite of them. And in that survival, I found something I had thought I'd lost: forever dignity. The hospital staff treated me with reverence, like a symbol of resilience. Strangers sent letters after reading the articles, calling me brave, calling me strong. And though I never sought attention, I accepted it because I knew my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every mother who had been treated as disposable, to every elderly parent who had been silenced by children who measured their worth in dollars. I remember standing on my porch weeks later, the sun warm on my face, the air alive with the scent of blooming flowers. For the first time in months, maybe years, I stood tall. I wasn't waiting for footsteps behind me, for whispers in hallways. I wasn't waiting to be erased. I was present, whole, unbroken. And yet even in that peace, there was sorrow. Because the truth is, I had not only lost children to betrayal, I had lost the illusion that they ever loved me as I thought they did. The mother in me still longed for the little hands that once held mine, the laughter of children who saw me as their world. But those children had grown into strangers, and I had to let them go. Justice had been served, yes. The community had turned against them. The law had moved to protect me. The finances had been secured. But the ache of betrayal remained a scar I would carry always. I tell you this because you need to know betrayal has consequences, and those consequences do not vanish. They echo, they ripple, they burn. If you believe that those who betray their own parents should face the weight of justice, write number 1 in the comments. If you believe dignity is worth more than inheritance press-like, because I need to know after everything I've endured that there are still voices in this world who understand what loyalty, love, and respect mean. Anna and David thought they could strip me of everything. Instead, they stripped themselves of the very things they claimed to value most. And that more than any court ruling or headline was the aftermath of their choices. When I look back now, it almost feels like 2 different lives. The life before the hospital where I lived, small and quiet, bending under the weight of silence, and the life after where I finally stood upright, no longer afraid to take up space in my own story. Recovery was slow, painful, but every ache in my chest reminded me that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of writing the ending my children tried to deny me. I no longer measured my worth through their eyes. I no longer begged for scraps of affection. I began each morning with a whisper to myself, "You are alive because you chose to fight." I rebuilt my days not around fear, but around dignity. I enrolled in a local seniors yoga class, not because I needed the exercise, but because I needed community. I cooked meals that I wanted, not just the cheapest ingredients I could find. I wore clothes that made me feel alive, not the faded hand-me-downs I once used to keep up the illusion of poverty. Slowly, I became visible again to myself, most of all. The trust Mr. Allen set up for me gave me freedom. I began supporting programs for elderly women who had been silenced or exploited, women whose children treated them as burdens, not blessings. I met survivors of the same wounds I carried, and together we turned our pain into purpose. One woman. Clara came to me in tears after hearing my story in a local meeting. My daughter has been stealing my pension for years, she confessed. I thought I had no voice, no choice. But you showed me I can stand up. Watching her walk taller after taking legal steps to protect herself was worth more than all the money my children had tried to steal. The foundation grew quietly, fueled by my determination and by the whispers of other women who no longer wanted to be invisible. And with every life it touched, I felt my own heart heal a little more. But healing did not erase the scar. Anna and David remained estranged. They called sometimes voices thick with regret, but regret born not of love, only of loss. They had lost their reputations, their security, their inheritance. And now they wanted forgiveness as a key back into my life. I met Anna once in a cafe. She looked older than her years, her face worn, not from age, but from shame. She held my hands across the table, tears streaking her face. "Mom, I don't know why I did what I did. I thought I was protecting myself, my family. But I see now I destroyed the very bond that should have mattered most." I listened quietly. I didn't yell. I didn't scold. I simply said, "Love doesn't calculate. The moment you measured my life against money, you broke something you can't repair." She sobbed, but I stood and walked away, because forgiveness, though it can heal, does not always mean reconciliation. David never faced me directly. His pride was too heavy. But I heard through neighbors that his job was gone, his friends distant, his marriage strained. He told people I had betrayed him, that I had humiliated him. But I knew the truth. He had humiliated himself the moment he chose greed over blood. And here is the message I want you to carry from my story. Betrayal may shatter you, but it can also rebuild you stronger if you choose not to stay broken. For too long, I believed dignity could be sacrificed in silence. I thought enduring quietly made me noble. But silence does not protect dignity. It erases it. It was only when I spoke, when I exposed the truth, when I refused to let their betrayal define me, that I reclaimed who I was. So I ask you, if you've ever been silenced, if you've ever been made to feel like a burden, if you've ever been betrayed by those who should have protected you, what will you do? Will you let them write your ending? Or will you take the pen back and write it yourself? If you believe dignity is worth fighting for at any age, write number 1 in the comments. If you believe silence is the enemy of justice, press like. Because together we can make sure no voice is erased, no life is measured in dollars, no mother is abandoned in her hour of need. Today I live not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not as a mother erased, but as a woman reborn. And every sunrise reminds me that it is never too late to reclaim your story. My children thought they had won when they refused that pen in the hospital room, but they lost everything while I gained the one thing they could never buy, never steal, never destroy my dignity. And that, more than wealth, more than inheritance, more than even survival, is the true victory.